Welcome, everyone, to A Good Place where truth and integrity meet, where I will be introducing you to today's thought-provoking and compelling premier whistleblowers, educators, authors, journalists, humanitarians, activists, celebrities, and they all have one thing in common. They are people of truth and integrity, and many are considered modern-day heroes. And I have another one of these guests today. His name is Rob Kall. But before that, I just want to say hi to Donald Jeffries. He will be joining me today, and he's my favorite co-host of all and dear friend. So thank you, Donald, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me as always, Ellen.
Okay, so Rob is an award-winning journalist, inventor, software architect, connector, and visionary. He is the author of The Bottom-Up Revolution, Mastering the Emerging World of Connectivity. Articles by and about him have been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, ABC, and the HuffPost, Success, Discover, and other media. He's given talks and workshops on Fortune 500 execs and national medical and psychological organizations, and he has pioneered first of their kind conferences in positive psychology, brain science, and story. He hosts some of the world's smartest, most interesting, and powerful people in his Bottom Up radio show. And Rob founded and publishes one of the top Google ranked progressive news and opinion sites, OpEdNews.com, which has seen over 23 million visitors. So, what a treat to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's really great to have you as well. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, what is the bottom-up revolution?
Well, most people, when they think about bottom-up, think about grassroots or crowdfunding or crowdsourcing or wisdom of the crowds or the comments on Amazon or Yelp, but it's a lot more than that. I discovered it because of my experience with my website, OpEdNews.com. I started it as a personal blog, and I started inviting other people to write for it, so that now we've had thousands of writers and published over 100,000 articles. And in the process, I learned that if I took a more bottom-up approach to it, it did a lot better and it was more successful. So what does that mean, a bottom-up approach? It means that I trusted people. It means that I brought in my users, my readers, my writers, my volunteers, and I gave them the power to have a voice, to participate in making decisions. And the more I did that, the more I learned that the site was getting more successful. So we've had up to 800,000 plus unique visitors in a given month. And so I was fascinated with this idea of bottom up. I was seeing other people talk about it, and I decided that I would do a radio show about it, which I've been doing for 11 years now. And the idea was basically to interview people who were thought leaders or people who had been successful because they took bottom-up approaches to things. So I've interviewed Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, Arianna Huffington, Robin Chase, the founder of Zipcars, lots of anthropologists, neuropsychologists, all kinds of people who are people who write about the internet and what have you. And I made some exciting discoveries along the way that I hadn't really thought about. For example, I interviewed Fritjof Capra, read his book, The Systems View of Life, and I realized that the old science that existed, the Newtonian Cartesian model of science, was a mechanistic model that counted things and took things apart. And the new science that was developed to explain things that the old science couldn't explain, like subatomical particle physics and quantum physics and ecosystems, the new science is called systems theory or chaos theory or linear dynamics. And this new model is based on relationships and patterns, and it's a bottom-up way of seeing the world and scientifically explaining the world. So that was a kind of a revelation for me, that even science had gone through a paradigm shift from top-down to bottom-up. And top-down is the opposite of bottom-up, basically. Top-down tends to be associated with hierarchy and domination and centralization and control, secrecy, and so that was one discovery that was really very significant for me. And then the other one was I'm on a positive psychology listserv, and we can get into my work with positive psychology, but I've been on that listserv for about 20 years, and I encountered someone who had written a book. Darshan Narvaez wrote a book called The Neurobiology of the Development of Human Morality. And when I got to reading that book, it was like a light bulb went off. It just blew my mind, really, because what she was saying was that humans spent most of their existence evolving over literally millions of years to become bottom-up people. Now, what does that mean for humans? It means that we cooperate with each other, we care about each other, we have empathy for each other, we think in ways that consider how we're going to affect each other and nature. Because up until the last 10,000, before the last 10,000 years, humans mostly lived in small hunter-gatherer bands. Not even tribes, just small bands of 50 to 80 people. They depended upon each other, and they depended upon nature. They had to have a relationship with nature that was safe. And so they had to do things so that nature would take care of them, and they would take care of nature. And what Narvaez does in her book is she describes how there are literally hundreds of genes that we've evolved to possess that make us have morals. Now, morals really mean treating other people and nature in a right way. And to me, I see all of this as very bottom up. So while the simple idea of bottom up is thrown around a lot, sometimes with economics, I think that there's a much bigger picture of it that I think is worth embracing. And that if we do, it could make us better people, make our culture better, and bring us a future that's more sustainable and hopeful.
Mhm. Wow, that's just amazing, the work that you do, and I appreciate your worldview and what your objective and what you're trying to do. Can I ask you, how did you end up in this field? What did your journey look like in order for you to end up where you are today?
Okay. Well, I started out majoring in physics, decided I didn't like writing code, which you had to do back when I was getting started. And so I switched to psychology, and I got into biofeedback because I thought that biofeedback was a way to wake people up and empower them to take greater self-responsibility for themselves and their bodies. And I did that for a long time. I got involved I started a company, Future Health, at futurehealth.org, and I invented a kind of a high-tech mood ring that I call the BioQ ring that was fairly successful. Over the years, I've probably sold about 500,000 of them in different forms. And from that, I got into working with electronic technology and then computerized technology as it came out, and I got involved in developing software for biofeedback. And then I also, in around that same time, I made a tape, a guided relaxation tape. And my goal was to include 6 or 7 different kinds of relaxation approaches in the one tape. And one of the things I included was think about a heartwarming experience you've had and smile and connect that with a warm feeling in your heart. Can you do that now? Can you think of heartwarming? Can you think of a heartwarming experience you've had?
Right now, I'm sitting here with a sweet cat in my lap, so it's pretty heartwarming.
There you go. Yeah.
It's easy for me to do those things.
Yeah, but it's not always easy for people to remember, because heartwarming. I really got into it and the reason I got into it was I was hooking people up to biofeedback equipment and measuring their heart rate and their muscle tension and their breathing and their hand temperature, which should go up if you're relaxing. And what I found is if I played the tape and people were able to think about a real memory of a heartwarming experience, then all their physiology would go in the right direction. Their muscles would relax, their breathing would calm down, their heart would slow down, everything would go in the right direction. And that was like a real aha moment for me.
Mm.
And it fascinated me. And it was the early 80s, so there was no internet. So I had to go to Index Medicus and Psych Abstracts and places like that to look for research that would support it. And there wasn't any. The only thing I could find that came close, there was some research on smiling. And that research found that people who were depressed had stronger frown muscles, and people who were happy had stronger smile muscles. And there was also a study that looked at endorphins, the natural opiates that our body produces. And it found that when people had thrills or chills up the back of their necks, they were mediated by these endorphins. And if you gave a drug that blocked that, then they would stop getting the thrills or chills.
Mm-hmm. I have a personal story about that. Gosh, maybe it was 10 years ago. I was having anxiety. There was some things that had happened in my family. There was deaths in my family. So it was very difficult for me to process that. And I also actually was working in the mental health field for a while doing drug and alcohol counseling. So it was difficult when you're kind of experiencing some issues yourself. And so I went and did biofeedback, and somehow it transmuted that day and those experiences into something like positive. Like instead of depression and sadness, it was like this lit golden, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but how they did it. But every time I think back to that day, I have a completely different feeling. It was absolutely amazing. Just a huge fan.
Oh, great. Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So I got into trying to understand heartwarming, and I started giving talks about it at national conferences for professionals, and I started asking people in workshops to write down their heartwarming experiences, and so I collected thousands of them, literally, and I discovered that not all of them were what I would consider heartwarming, but they were positive experiences. So I kind of shifted a little bit, and I came up with this idea that positive experiences are the basic building blocks of our ability to be happy, to be in loving relationships, to face adversity, to connect with people. And I took this model, and the next step, I talked to psychologists and psychiatrists about it. And not one out of at least 1,000 that I spoke to ever disagreed. So what do you do if you know that positive experiences are so valuable? You build skills in having more, better, deeper, stronger ones that are a part of your life. And so I put together what I call an anatomy of positive experience that I presented at the Positive Psychology Summit meeting in the United States and the Positive Psychology Canadian Conference, which are peer-reviewed conferences. Basically, that's one of the things I got into as, you ask about my life. That was an exciting part for me, pulling that together. And that's a piece of my book. I talk in the book about how most positive experiences that people have are with other people. They're about connection. You want to intensify a positive experience, connect to another person. You see something beautiful, share that with the person you're with. Talk about it, make sounds, express your emotions more strongly, smile more. One of the things I came up with is a kind of an anatomy of smiling. I mean, when you think about smiling, most people think about the corners of their mouth going up. But there are at least 5 different muscles on your face that are associated with smiling. And then there are the smiles that are off the face. And they're perhaps some of the most fun ones. They've been fun for me to discover.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that pulled me out of a different funk, was just reaching out to others. Again, it's connecting with others. And for me, helping others, not just connecting, but by being of service. And I learned that just from being a drug and alcohol counselor. And I took a lot of those things, and they were very spiritual teachings in order to help people recover. And I remember just thinking, you know what, I'm going to not think about myself, because that just causes depression and sadness if you're going through things. And it was hard to focus on the positive things in my life, but I could look through a photo album of happy times and that would warm me. And then just animals or in friends and connecting to friends. So anyways, just being of service. Like I remember I over volunteered. I volunteered and I have children. So I wanted to show them they're foster kids. So they run on the more selfish, I need to take care of myself mode. So we went and fed the homeless. And then I would go do visits to the hospice, and not to be a goody two shoes, but because it actually made me feel better. And nothing is more beautiful than affecting a person in a positive way and making them feel good. I love that feeling. And it's just nice to know that every person out there can affect a person. Even if you're at the store and you open the door for someone, you smile at someone, it's contagious and it can affect them, then they'll feel good. Or I love the idea of going through a coffee place and paying for the person behind you. And so those things can just change you just energetically. And I guess one of my questions to you is, do you find physics related to metaphysics? I guess that's a second part question. I'm sure you want to comment on what I just discussed.
Yeah, well, in terms of what you discussed, I agree with you completely. Giving is one of the very common positive experience that people have. And the other thing is that receiving is and accepting gifts is also something that's nice too. And, some people I think have a hard time doing that because they don't want to take advantage of somebody. But very often people want to give, and giving them the ability to give is a nice thing, and it makes the giver feel good. And like you said, giving feels good. And so accepting helps the giver to feel good too.
And even if they don't respond the way you would hope, so they've got stuff going on. That's what's going on with them. And so I don't, some people like, wow, I just tried to help them. I don't think that at all. I think they're suffering. They're going through things. It's going to take time for them, especially when you're dealing with the homeless and addicts and different things like that. You can't expect to have a positive response. You tried, and don't stay out of the reaction, stay out of whatever it is, because you did your part, and don't let it affect you if they don't respond the way you want it, because maybe in a little while, a few days, maybe even an hour later, it will affect them, hopefully.
Exactly. We talk about unconditional love. Well, think about unconditional giving, unconditional connecting. And those are all things that can help other people too. And you can do for them as well. But you do it for yourself too, because when you give, it does make you feel great.
Yeah, and it gives you purpose. We as human beings need purpose. Even animals, dogs need to have purpose. And I mean, all animals we all need to feel like we're doing something positive. Like having a radio station that allows all this truth to come out into the world and sharing information that maybe other shows won't cover. That's a purpose, giving truth a chance to speak. And so I just see that on so many different levels. And as talk show hosts, we're sharing information that we hope affects them. I like thought provoking. If you can get people to think, if I can just have thought provoking guests and get people maybe thinking in ways they never have, I feel like I've done my job.
Yeah, me too. So you asked about metaphysics and physics. You want me to talk about that?
I would love to. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the old science looked at things, took them apart, counted them, measured them. The new science looks, as I said, at patterns and systems. The new science is nonlinear. The old science is linear. Now, nonlinear means circles or cycles, and when we look at the world in that way, we see something very different with very different possibilities. One of the aspects of nonlinear or systems theory thinking is the idea of emergence. A pattern, a cycle can start to develop, and it can reverberate, and it can get bigger very fast. And when that happens, emergent properties can spin off and develop and manifest. And this can happen in any system. It can happen in a culture. It can happen in an economic system. It can happen in an ecosystem. And what's really cool about it is it doesn't take a majority. It doesn't take 50% plus one for it to happen. It can happen almost overnight. And we see this kind of viral stuff that goes on the internet. And those are examples of emergent processes that can pop up out of nowhere. And when we see a system that has a lot of problems, a lot of things wrong, and we see a system that is controlled by very powerful people, by billionaires, by giant corporations, it can seem kind of daunting and hopeless. But the reality is, the new science tells us that emergent properties can happen really quickly. And those tell us that if the right series of steps happen and we help to amplify them, then almost overnight we can change the world. And that's a very exciting idea.
Yeah, I like that, amplifying it. And people, well, we can get into that in a little bit. Donald, my quiet co-host, I've been kind of taking over a little bit. I want to turn it over to you, and maybe you can tell us something, a heartwarming experience. We can go back to that, or take it away.
Oh, sure. Well, I have plenty of heartwarming experiences, especially with my kids when I was very involved in their lives. I have tons of just experiences with them that I can always fall back on. But
Donald, what I've learned is you got to pick a very specific, real one, and you can't come up with a generic answer. Like people will say to me, I went to the ocean. Well, that doesn't bring the same kind of physical response as I went to the ocean on this day with these people, and this is what I saw. So the more specific you can get about it, the more powerful it's going to be in terms of touching your heart.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but what I wonder is what you're talking. This fascinates me because recently I've been reading a lot about, and I'm trying to get some of these guys on my show. There are authors out there with. I know one of the books is called "You Are the Placebo" and things like that. How does what you're talking about? Does it extend to take the next step to where, if you can utilize that energy that's coming from somewhere, whether you want to call it positive energy or it's just contained in yourself as a power, can you heal yourself? Because apparently there's a lot of things saying that you can heal yourself from virtually anything. If you, that's what these some of these doctors are saying. Do you think that's possible?
I think that the human body has incredible healing capacity that we have repressed massively over the years. One of the top-down problems that I think we face is healthcare. Yes. I believe that healthcare has been pounded into our head that we are dependent on doctors, dependent on drugs, and depending on a healthcare system to fix us. Now, one of the reasons I got into positive psychology because I got into this heartwarming concept. But the other thing that got me thinking was psychology, psychotherapy. For its history, I started getting into positive psychology in the 80s. And up until the 80s, psychotherapy was all about pathology. It was all about find out what's wrong with somebody, diagnose them, treat the disorder, treat the pathology, and fix it, get rid of it. And I had a question. Can you help somebody by teaching them how to be stronger, teaching them how to be happier? Can you teach somebody to lift themselves up and leave behind those pathologies? And I believed that it was possible. So I started giving talks about my thinking about that, mostly to psychologists, and they started using it and they started getting good results with it. And I think that that's an answer to your question. I think part of it is humans didn't have medicine, so to speak, the medical system that we have now for most of their existence. They had nature. And they interacted with nature. So they used some medicinal cures, lots of them. And then they also had a connection to nature. We know from indigenous people that they have a relationship to nature that is of a spiritual nature. They talk to the trees. They talk to the fish. If they kill an animal for food, they may pray with the animal or thank the animal. And I think that different relationship to nature is a big deal. I think having a connection to your body is a big deal. Now, I got into biofeedback because biofeedback was a way to help people to reconnect with their bodies. And so there's some answer for you.
No, absolutely, and I think that I call it the medical industrial complex is especially in this country is absolutely shameful. I don't know if you've seen recently. Oh, I don't know I wrote about it. It's I think the second, third, maybe fourth doctor are now coming out that have been exposed going back decades. And charged with fake cancer diagnosis. They were diagnosing patients with cancer that didn't have it
I've
just to make
read
money.
that, and
Isn't
that's
that? I mean, that's
factual. It's
yeah. And
very
can you?
sad.
I mean, how widespread is that? But I
It's really widespread. It's not just cancer either. I think that the pharmaceutical industry has allied with some doctors who are unprincipled, and they've produced a drug culture, a prescription drug culture in the United States that is probably unrivaled anywhere in the world. That is really a monstrosity. And there are a few people who have written about it. One of them is named Whitaker. I'm going to have to think of the name of his book, but he's written about how drug companies have allied with doctors to sell a treatment and even to come up with diagnostic names and titles and numbers just to have a drug. I mean, you look at like Ritalin and you look at the attention deficit disorder market.
yes.
And there are literally millions of children who are drugged, and it's bad. It's bad because those drugs can potentiate worse problems. So you put a kid on those drugs, they have a higher risk of developing bipolar disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, or OCD, and it's literally the drugs can make them worse. And they've introduced it into the culture so that now teachers in schools demand that children be put on those medications, and it's just wrong. And then you've got medications like for people who have mental problems, like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And the reality is the studies have shown that if you never put anybody on one of those medications, they're going to do better in the long run than if you did put them on medications. Yes. But, and this is a big but, it takes a certain community to support a person if they're not going to be on the medication.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And our communities have broken down. Our consumer culture, this top-down centralized culture, has broken down our communities so that we don't have the extended families and networks that would normally support somebody who is having problems. So it's not like you can make a choice between a drug or a community support, because the community support is gone. And it's because our community values have disappeared. And this is part of what I write about in my book, is how we need to reawaken a sense of community. We've got to do that, or we're going to be in a very bad place, because these drugs are not the answer, and they are being offered as the only answer, and we have to do something about that.
Well, wouldn't you experience a lot of powerful opposition? Though, to something like if you take your biofeedback approach and then extend it into this area I'm talking about, where the mind over matter to the ultimate degree. If you do that, big pharma is dead. The medical industrial complex is dead, because if people can care for themselves, they don't need your drugs anymore. They don't need all these expensive and unnecessary tests and so forth. But what happens? I mean, it's a lot of people would lose a lot of money under that scenario.
Yes, no question about it. I've been writing for 8 years. I was really glad to see that AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is advocating to get rid of billionaires. I've been saying for 8 years that billionaires are dangerous. They're bad for humanity. They're bad for the planet. And we need to get rid of them. And I have a whole section of my book about too big. There's a lot of stuff that's too big and too powerful, and we need to get rid of it. And pharmaceutical companies are part of that. And we give them way too much power, and that has to be taken away. And, Elizabeth Warren is talking about breaking up the big super platforms, Amazon and Facebook and Google. And I agree that needs to be done, that they've become too big and too powerful. We didn't know it when they started that they would get that way, but now we do, and we need to do something about it. And yes,
I hate to toot my own horn here, but if Ellie can tell you, I wrote a book called Survival of the Richest. So if you get a chance to check it out, it's all about that, how the system is rigged and how the 1% has rules everything, and how the rest of us at this point, the bottom half of America especially, they are making $27,000 or less, the bottom 50%. So we've really become the disparity of wealth is at an unbelievable level at this point.
And you know, Democrats and Republicans alike both are concerned about what's going on with health insurance because it affects them directly. And Google and the same things that you know the left side also is concerned about. So that's interesting. It has nothing to do with you know, political views at all. So it's very disturbing. We've been reading some of the same articles as well. I can tell by your narrative. So it's really disturbing, really extremely disturbing. And my family came over from Sweden. So I have some comparisons, and I've been in Europe. And a lot of people, that is somewhat socialistic, and they've adapted. It's kind of like on the border of capitalism and socialistic. And those are generally happy, well taken care of people.
Well, I think that there's a whole false narrative about socialism that the mainstream media is selling now. I mean, the other day I was looking at MSNBC, and it started with Morning Joe attacking the idea of socialism, trying to get Governor Hickenlooper to say that he embraced capitalism, and he wasn't willing to do that. And so they went after him. And the person who followed after the Morning Joe show did the same thing. And then the next person, they spent the whole day attacking socialism and lauding capitalism. Well, the problem is there are all these different varieties of capitalism, and capitalism back in the 50s and 60s after World War II actually was pretty good for the middle class. But the capitalism that has evolved or mutated is pathological. It's extractive, it's predatory, and it's really bad for most of humanity. And it could be changed. I think that the answer is to make a more bottom-up kind of capitalism that pays attention to the needs of most people. Now, the libertarians and the economic purists are going to say, oh, no, we need to have an open market. Well, there is no open market right now. What we have right now is special deals for the most powerful people, the biggest corporations, and we need to get rid of that. We need to take a look, and we need to get rid of a lot of the big that exists. So when I say we need to get rid of a lot of big, we need to make rules that make it so that too big is illegal because it's too dangerous. So maybe start by getting rid of the idea that people can inherit billions of dollars. Put a $20 million limit on it and keep it there. Why should somebody who's born to wealthy parents have all this money? I don't think so. And make it so that if somebody starts to become wealthy, there's a cap on it. They can't have more than a certain amount of money. I'm sorry, I don't think that anybody needs a $150 million painting or a $250 million home or a $400 million yacht. Those things are not necessary to be a decent person. And I think there's a real problem with that. You know, I think this is all part of the symptoms, the blowback of civilization. This kind of stuff wouldn't happen before there was civilization. Before there was civilization, there were people living in small hunter-gatherer bands. And I've asked anthropologists, a number of them, what would one of those bands do if somebody decided they were going to keep half of the band's resources to themselves? And it's a pretty uniform reply. They would either throw them out, treat them like they were insane, or one gave me an example of what the northern First Nation people up in Nunavut would do. They would take the guy and put him on an ice floe and go out into the ocean, basically kill him. And I'm not saying kill anybody, but I'm saying you don't put up with that stuff. You cut it off and you don't let it happen. And the way you don't let it happen is you stop it from developing with new people, and you don't let anybody who dies pass it on. And you end up then with a world that is going to have less individuals who have too much power, because that too much power produces these inequalities that are just so bad for humanity.
Agreed. Donald, do you want to say anything
Yeah,
else?
certainly.
Since I
That's
have a
why I
lot.
say.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's Ella can tell you that a lot of your talking points are right out of my book, Survival of the Richest: How the Corruption of the Marketplace and the Disparity of Wealth Created the Greatest Conspiracy of All. And I've got numbers. So many I couldn't even begin to remember. And since that time, I've written for Naomi Wolf's Daily Cloud a couple times about how the disparity of wealth is growing greater and greater. And you can't have a first world economy when half your country has nothing, and that bottom 50% has less than 1% of the collective wealth. And that's what I think we need to concentrate on, because the money is still shooting upwards into the hands of fewer and fewer people. And you have to do something about it. You talk about when capitalism worked, and it did. We had the post-war boom, but it worked with a 90% top rate during the Eisenhower years. We think of that as the ideal, going back to the great times. There was a 90% top tax rate, which Kennedy cut to, I think, 70-some%. And it wasn't until Reagan came in the opposite, he cut it to like 28% or whatever it was, which had such drastic implications for the economy. But that's when things were working well, and you didn't have CEOs making thousands of times more than their workers. You had pensions, you had unions, you had things that everybody was making pretty much a living wage. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I knew fathers that worked at Sears, Montgomery Ward's, places like that. They just worked behind the counter. They didn't have a special job, and they made a wage where they were able to raise a family with as many kids as they wanted. Their wives didn't have to work. That's what we need to talk about. We don't do that. Instead, we just we divide into these camps where I see we're talking about socialism. The Republicans, that's their new talking point, is they're just attacking everything as socialism. And of course, the Democrats are locked into their identity politics. They're alienating people too. So we're caught. I'm a populist, so I think we need real populism.
Well, I think that the way to frame it, because so much of our politics is about framing. I think the way to frame it is to talk about bottom-up capitalism that cares, capitalism that is inclusive. And I think that's a way to use the language that the opposition, that the powerful are trying to abuse. And framing is a very important part of how we get things done. I've got a whole chapter about language and framing in my book, The Bottom-Up Revolution, because we use our language. I mean, and the most effective framing is framing that where you're creating phrases or words that your opposition actually uses without even realizing that they're helping you by using that language. And so we've got to change the frame for these ideas. And so maybe one of the first ones is, instead of talking about socialism, say what we really want is bottom-up capitalism.
Makes sense. And we only have maybe like 10, 15 minutes left. So I was going to ask you, what excites you right now in today's environment, politically or otherwise? It's a scary time, but it's also an interesting time.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about the 2020 elections. I think that unless the Democrats really screw up and rig it so that Joe Biden gets elected, I think he's the worst candidate of all of those out there, then I think that we have a real chance that we're going to have a good person in the White House. I think that we're going to see more and more progressive young candidates elected to the House and the Senate. I am thrilled with the people of color, the women who joined the Congress this time around. It's a start, but it's a good start, and I've never seen so many really solidly progressive, strong voices, and I think that that's going to make a big difference. Representative Omar was recently, they attempted to chastise her for what she said about Israel. I support her 100%. I'm Jewish, but you have to be able to criticize Israel, and you have to criticize a right-wing extremist who embraces hate groups like Benjamin Netanyahu. And so I think that we're making some progress there. And I think that Trump, with his crazy tweets, is helping us really. You know, when he tweets out that the Democrats hate the Jews, you know, the Jews know otherwise. The Jews.
That's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. And the fact that his echo chamber tries to sell that makes him and their echo chamber all the more ridiculous. And I think that is, in a sense, it's good because people are waking up and seeing just how ridiculous it is. So that's exciting. I'm excited about my book. I think my message is we need to develop what I call connection consciousness. We need to go from the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, to treat others as though they are you, because we're all connected. We are all part of the same ecosystem, or all part of the same culture. And if we can do that, and if we can start seeing the world with that kind of connection consciousness, we're going to have a better world. We're going to treat each other better, with more respect, with more love. And that's a big deal. And I think it's a simple concept, but it can really change things.
And because I'm an activist, and I'll get back, I heard you were trying to speak to, Donald, what can people do? What can, we're talking about being of service and reaching out, and that's great. But as far as an activist standpoint, what can we do in today's politically speaking, and what's going on with health insurance? I mean, I know that our voices matter when they're in numbers. So what do you suggest to people?
Well, Howard Zinn and Woody Guthrie both said that it's going to be small things that are going to change the world. Mm-hmm. I even started a website, smallacts.org.
We'll add that to my list to give to people.
And basically, I believe that you don't have to do something huge. I like to tell, in my book, I tell the story of Daniel Ellsberg. I interviewed him a couple times. He was the whistleblower.
I'm very familiar. Yes, amazing.
He told us the world about the Pentagon Papers. What I learned from him was that he went to a talk, and there was a guy who had been arrested for protesting against the Vietnam War, and he was getting ready to go to jail. He was going to go to jail, I think it was the next day. And there are thousands of people who get arrested for civil disobedience. And this guy, I don't remember his name. It's in the book, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. This guy was just another guy who had taken a risk, taken a stand, and he was going to end up in jail because he protested. But he inspired Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg was in a position of power. He was in a position where he could release information that could make a big difference. Mm-hmm. You never know what your individual act can do. And because of that, if you do anything to make a change happen, it might be the thing that touches somebody else. It might be the thing that sets off a series of reactions that cause that emergence of a change that's huge, that happens overnight. And with the Pentagon Papers, it almost was like that. This guy, it's like the butterfly wings that cause a hurricane across the planet kind of idea. This guy gave a talk about him going to jail as a peace protester. And not too long after that, the whole world was paying attention to Daniel Ellsberg and the release of the Pentagon Papers. You could be the person who sets that off. And so I believe that an important part of my idea about bottom up is that it's local. It's not centralized. You do things at a local level. Talk to people in your community. Build your community. Support your community by buying from local businesses, by hiring local people. And even if you buy from Amazon, you can look and see that it's an Amazon product, or if it's something that some local entrepreneur is selling. And if you can, make the choice of picking that. And I try to eat organic food. My grandparents, all they ate was organic because there were no pesticides being put on everything like there is now. And I spend a little bit more for it. I might spend an extra $30.
Right.
Yeah, $1.50. It's not very much. And I look at the difference as being, it's good for my health and it's good for supporting the people growing the organic food. look the same.
Donald, sorry. Go
Look
ahead.
the same way at doing that with supporting local businesses. Spend a little bit more than you would spend if you went to one of the big giant box stores and support a local business.
And in a way, you're help saving America and what we're founded on.
Yes.
And Donald, I know you had a question.
No, I don't know. It might have been my rumbling my microphone again. No, but I certainly agree with all that. I mean, you got to go natural. I mean, I take, especially when you get older, I think we need to take extra vitamins and supplements. I don't take any pharmaceuticals, never have.
Good for you.
And I'm 62, so I take lots of vitamins, lots of supplements, and I think those are the things like turmeric. Spice like that were cinnamon, things like the simple spices that
apple cider vinegar.
Apple cider vinegar, yes, exactly. These have proved garlic. I mean, these things have proven to be fantastic for your health. So I think you take along with positive thinking, which I don't do so well, but I am trying the other side of it, and I think that it's really important.
Let me give you some tips on the positive stuff. You want to build your you want to build your skills in having positive experiences. So you want to be prepared for positive experiences so that when you encounter one, you're ready to make the most of it. You want to be able to recognize what positive experiences are so that you even notice it. I mean, so many people don't even notice when they have an opportunity for a positive experience and they just let them pass by. Then when you're in the middle of a positive experience, you want to make it stronger and deeper. One thing is just smile more, connect with other people, make some sounds. Yum, it's delicious. And then you want to remember them. You want to try to keep a diary of your happy experiences, your positive experiences, your heart warmers, because we tend to block those. When we have an experience that turns on our endorphins, gives us that glow, well, those endorphins were evolved to help us deal with pain. So they block the consolidation of memory.
So we procreate as well. They want everything to feel good, so we procreate. I think that's part of it too.
So you want to write them down and have a diary of them and record of them so you can refer to them and then use them and remember them when you're encountering tough times so that you can kind of balance out your perspective on life. And all of this applies also to connecting as well.
Yeah. And one thing I was going to say is, well, if you're listening out there and you happen to be one of those people who buys into this chemical industry, and I'm talking about the pharmaceutical industry, you just one thing Google can offer you. I like Brave. I've gone Brave, which is a great search tool online. You can download that as well. If you don't want to support Google, try a different internet search. If you don't want to support the pharmaceutical companies, and this will benefit you as well because these chemicals do a number on your physiology, search natural cures, because these doctors, and my husband went to the doctor and he asked about, can I use apple cider vinegar or borax? And he goes, you know what, Cody, I prescribe medications. That's my job. He admitted that. And I thought that was really interesting. And then don't forget, go ahead.
I did some polling, I guess it's been a while, but I did polling because I was looking at how people responded to biofeedback and ideas about biofeedback, which to me are taking responsibility for your health and not necessarily doing what the doctor gives you. And what I found is that conservatives actually are more likely to say that they want to take self-responsibility for themselves. And I was kind of disappointed that liberals, they're more willing to accept the authoritarian doctor's situation.
I was going to say, you being a liberal, I'm very familiar. It goes back to the 80s when you first started hearing about Laetrile and things like that. It was the right wing that pushed this. You still have some ex-hippies that run health food stores and so forth. But yeah, I think you're right. The right wing is much more receptive to, and I think more skeptical of which is ironic because they don't want universal health care, but they are skeptical of our system.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that because, I live here in Oregon and California, and you do have these so-called hippies, and they have these stores, and they do holistic medicine. Like my primary that I used to have, but the insurance won't let me go to her anymore. She has a degree in holistic medicine and Western medicine. And, and she's a bit of a hippie. So she definitely, so that's interesting that you guys pointed that out to me. I guess that's how it is. That's something to consider. And where can we buy your book? This is important to me. I want everyone, I think it's on pre-order, or is it available yet? Because I might have read something out of date.
Coming out May 22nd. It's available on Amazon, on Powell's Books. If you go to my website, robkall.com, ROBKALL.com, it has links to about a half a dozen different sites and sources besides Amazon where you can get the book. Although if you get it at Amazon, it kind of gives me credit points that people measure based on Amazon, but do what your principles define for you. It is available in a lot of different places.
And it's one of those things where it has, like everything, there seems to be this polarity, or I'm trying to think of the right word. It's a two-edged sword, because I know people who could not get published, but Amazon gave them that platform.
And writers like me, I don't trust, I don't like a lot of things about Amazon, but I religiously check Amazon because that's the only place you can really tell how your book is doing most of the time, because you look at the book's rankings and you can at least get an idea of it there. So yeah, we do kind of rely on it.
Yeah, and Donald, do you want to share? I know you have a radio show now on Truth Frequency Radio, which is available on iHeartRadio. What time is your show? The when and where? And I think we know the why.
Yeah, it's called I Protest. It comes out, I'm always protesting something. It's every Friday from 5 to 7 Eastern Standard Time, and we have a variety of guests from all across the political spectrum, because I'm outside this right-left paradigm, so I like to talk to people from all over the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. And then I have a new channel that's coming up. I've only put a few videos up yet. It's called A Good Place with Ella, and you can look that up on YouTube, and I need some support on that. I just started it maybe about a week ago. And so I really would like for you to hit subscribe. And not to mention, Rob here has a YouTube. He was talking about his podcast. So that's available on YouTube as well. And you have these great websites.
Is the name of the YouTube channel, and the radio show available on Pacifica Radio and iTunes and Progressive Radio Network is Bottom Up Show.
And what about in the future? Do you have any projects lined up?
Well, the big thing for me is the book rollout. So I'm working on that now. And I've got a couple book ideas that I'm fleshing out as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, go ahead. You sound like you want to say something, Donald?
No, that wasn't me.
Okay, it must be something going on with the audio.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for platforms like this. And even YouTube, I have some problems with YouTube right now with the censorship going on. I mean, it's getting really heavy-handed. Even with Google, the algorithms, these robotic algorithms who don't. Oh, there we go, guys. So everybody, you can buy his books on Amazon. Please visit his websites. And thank you for joining me again, and tune in next week.